Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Content Marketing Reimagined. I'm Aaron Jackson, one of the project directors here at the Insight Group, and I'm going to keep this introduction really short as we have a really great panel today and not that much time, so I really want to get to some of their insights that we're going to be sharing. So before that, I do have a little bit of housekeeping. I've already had one question come in about will the webinar be recorded, and yes, it is going to be recorded, and we will be sending around the audio feed probably tomorrow if we get a chance. If not, first thing next week, so you have a chance to listen back. Another bit of housekeeping is this is very much an interactive webinar. You can join the conversation on Twitter. You can see in the top right of the screen there is the hashtag Insight Summit. Let us know if you're listening and if you have any questions, and we'll be tracking on Twitter. But we also have the question box built into the webinar as well. So feel free to use the questions in the webinar software. We'll be using those. I can already see there's a few coming in. So yeah, please do use that as well. And we'll be incorporating those throughout the discussion. So do get those in as soon as possible. Carrie, I've just seen your question that we will be sending around the deck with the recordings. But this is mainly an audio webinar. So do bear that in mind. I guess kind of that's pretty much it for housekeeping today, but I just want to say a big thank you to everyone joining us, both our panelists and everyone from around the world who's listening to the webinar. We had over 1,800 of you sign up. It's been a really popular webinar from a countless number of countries, so really glad you could all join us today, and hello if you're catching up on the recordings as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jack Edgar, who's going to be our moderator for today to introduce today's panel. Jack, great to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. Yeah, great to be here. And that is a hell of a lot of people who are very, very interested in content marketing, which is great to hear. And I suppose as well as a diversity in terms of where people are listening in from, what is amazing about our panel today is the diversity of industries. What brings them all together is a abundance of experience and knowledge in this area, but it's going to be really, really interesting seeing how similarities and differences between our different panelists and of course the companies they work for. Rather than doing a terrible job of trying to introduce them myself, I'm going to let them briefly introduce themselves firstly. So I'm going to come to you, Ricardo, first. So if you could just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and of course your role at ABInBev.
Hi, everybody. Good morning from New York. My name is Ricardo Marques. I've been with AB for about 13 years, different parts of the globe. Spreading the passion for beer. And currently, in my present role, I'm the Group VP Marketing for our core and value brands, which of course includes our global flagship brand, Budweiser. And I'm hoping to talk to you a little bit about some of the recent cases on Budweiser and some of the other brands, Busch and Natural Light, some of the cases that we're really excited about. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ricardo. Over to you, Jessica.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Jensen, and I'm the Global Director of Digital Marketing and Strategy at Qualcomm, and I'm calling in from San Diego, California. Also happy to be here. I've been in marketing for almost 20 years and digital for over half of that. So touch, social media, content obviously is a big component of that. Search, web, podcasting, influencers. So very happy to be part of this group and have a good chat today.
Fantastic, and it's definitely not your first webcast or podcast, as we'll find out later on today. Bit of a seasoned pro. So moving to you, Isaac.
Yeah, hello. Nice to be with everybody today. My name is Isaac Droke. I lead up social media influencer marketing at Visible. So rather than the other brands here that we're lucky enough to talk to, you probably haven't heard of Visible. So just would like to quickly talk about who we are. Really, we're the first all digital cloud-based carrier in the US, which is pretty exciting for us. We've completely overhauled, simplified the way consumers get paid for and manage their phone service. So it's all on Verizon's network, all $40 a month, and we just hit our year birthday the other week. So very excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks for thanks for coming along, Isaac. And our final speaker, actually, Chris Kim from Hitachi Vantara, he has been wrestling with GoToWebinar over the last couple of minutes. There he is. Look at that. Was set just in the nick of time. That is. I was going to say that is a seasoned pro if ever I've seen one. So, Chris, rather than me doing a terrible job of introducing you, I'm going to let you do it yourself.
No worries. Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. Chris Kim with Hitachi Vantara. I'm Director of Global Social Media. Hitachi Vantara, I guess the best way to think about it is we're sort of the IT arm of Hitachi Limited in Japan. We're headquartered in Santa Clara, California, which is where I'm calling from. And I've spent the last 15 or so years in technology marketing, mostly in the B2B space, mostly in community and social. So I hope to bring a little bit of a B2B perspective to the conversation, and I look forward to a great discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Chris. So as everyone can see, we actually have everybody's Twitter handles in the top right-hand side. So please feel free to, of course, follow up with any kind of questions or insights, or indeed gratitude if you love some of the insights that everyone has shared today. But also, yeah, be sure to kind of fire you some questions in real time as we go as well. So yeah, that is there to be done. And I'm going to start off with the topic of influencer marketing, primarily because that is something which came up in the research and the build up to this webinar kind of time and time again. And actually, I've already had quite a few people ask me questions on it already. And we're going to start off from the ground up. Jessica, I understand that you have indeed built an influencer program from the ground up, from very, very scratch. So, you know, that is finding anything from the right people, nurturing those relationships, crafting the contracts, etc. So can you tell me about how you went about doing so, again, from simply nothing to what you have now?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough a couple of jobs back when I was at Adidas to sit next to the guy that kicked off influencer entertainment marketing at Adidas. And so I sort of carried that with me years later. And I think that's part of what gave me kind of the inspiration and confidence, frankly, just to, you know, be scrappy and just figure it out. So fast forward to Qualcomm. And you know, we obviously have a very robust PR team. There's a lot of work being done with journalists and analysts, but having kind of grown up in the social media digital space, there were clearly a lot of folks on YouTube specifically, but also Instagram, that were pretty heavy hitters, big followers, big deep knowledge in the mobile technology, you know, VR, IoT, smart home, all those things that Qualcomm cares a lot about, and many of which were even mentioning Snapdragon, which is kind of our flagship brand. So they already kind of knew who we were. And so I just started to kind of follow them and engage with them and build very organic relationships through YouTube, Twitter, and then eventually kind of initiated phone calls. And it was almost, I always laugh, it was almost like dating. It was like, you know, feeling each other out and then getting on a very awkward phone call and then realizing, oh, yeah, there's a rapport and you're a good person and I want to hang out with you. So yeah, from there, it really then became much more, there was more kind of methodology, I guess, or rigor that I put around it once I identified about a dozen or so folks. But it was such a great learning. I mean, I realized, for example, that they weren't competitors. In the beginning, I was really concerned about telling any one of them that I was talking to the other, because I thought they might be competing with each other for audience and brand contracts. And I quickly realized, no, they're actually, most of them are friends and they travel to a lot of the same events together and they help each other. So those kinds of things I learned along the way. And before you know it, we started to bring them into some of our big events, commission them to do some video series, and began to really pull through the Qualcomm message, which often kind of gets buried underneath our consumer-facing partners, our OEMs, and do it in their own voice, in their authentic way. So it's been a great experience.
Fantastic. Yeah, I could almost hear everyone Googling as you compared finding influencers to dating, you know, Tinder for influencers. But I don't think that is currently being created. Maybe someone can go ahead and do it. To kind of bring it right back, I suppose, you know, you spoke about how you actually, you know, the actual process of finding the right people and getting the contracts set up. I suppose what was the impetus for actually developing an influencer program, given the fact that, you know, the company actually had little to no experience in that area?
Good question. I remember, so one of the other parts of my job is to work with our executives on their personal social media presence, so executive social. And I remember myself and our head of PR, we had met with our CEO and we were talking about a variety of things. And I remember him saying, you know, who speaks for us? And he was trying to say, like, who are our advocates? And again, we already, of course, had a very established traditional PR program with journalists and analysts who for sure speak for us and, you know, we have relationships with. But it just kind of, it sort of like put a little seed in the back of my mind. And I thought, like, what's the next generation of our advocates, our advocate program beyond journalists and analysts? And I knew that there was something in the YouTube and Instagram space that we could leverage and add to our existing program. So that was kind of the impetus.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually that brings me to you, Isaac. And you mentioned obviously Visible, a relatively new brand, but you look to leverage influencers, you know, almost straight away in terms of your growth. When I know, you know, looking at it, a lot of people might say it'd be far easier just to focus on becoming, you know, more established in inverted commas through traditional routes, and then, you know, look at generating an influencer program. But you didn't want to do that. You wanted to kind of bring it in from the very, very start. So, you know, why was that, and how have you found it?
Yeah, great question. Fortunate enough that we have, you know, a team of executives here at Visible who really understand and realize the importance of influencer marketing and the impact, you know, that it could have, so much so that, you know, as you touched on, you know, that was really our first play out in the wild. You know, we were trying to figure out how we can do this, and, you know, because we're so focused on, you know, the importance of community, you know, bringing that front and center with everything that we do, you know, from our, you know, members, from our fans that follow us on social, and then also from our influencer relationships as well. You know, we were lucky enough to find, you know, a team of, you know, about 30 people across the country, and really brought them in-house as much as we could, try to give them, you know, a peek inside the curtain, I guess, on who we are, you know, why we think we're a little different in the telecom space, and really wanted to treat it as a two-way relationship. You know, we wanted to, you know, get their feedback from what was working with, you know, our product, what was not, and really just letting them go wild. You know, we teamed up a variety of types of people, but really, you know, love this idea of getting creators. So they weren't your typical, you know, more lifestyle-y focused influencers. They were artists, got a few muralists, some photographers. So really wanted to bring, you know, what we think is cool about Visible and tell them, you know, have them explore it in their own, you know, language, point of view, and go from there, and really have established a great, you know, relationship with all of them, and have continued that process throughout the year. So it's been awesome and a thrill to work on.
And I can just imagine that, you know, just as you said, you know, we wanted to let them go wild. Half of the audience is going, fantastic, couldn't agree more, and probably the other half is striking fear into their hearts and thinking, oh, we can't just let them go wild. There has to be a degree of kind of checking and balancing in terms of what they're creating, and that raises a great question. You know, to what extent? Jessica, I'm going to just quickly come back to you. To what extent did you involve them in terms of their creative input, and how much freedom did they have in terms of what was being put out?
Great question. So this is actually one of the beautiful pieces of influencer marketing, is the fact that they are creators. At least the folks that we targeted and that we partnered with, they are absolutely content creators. In fact, they know that craft in many cases better than many of us do, because they live and breathe on social media properties. They're producers, they're editors, they know how to distribute, they know how to tell a story. They're pros. And so I was very open and very welcoming of their creative input. And I also know that the more it was in their voice, albeit some of our messaging and a couple of our key pillars needed to come through somewhere in there, I was flexible with how they told the story and how they really created their own content, because they know their audience better than we do, and we want it to feel authentic. We want there to be community engagement. I was just interviewing Trisha Hirschberger, who's one of the influencers we've worked with a couple of nights ago for the podcast that I do on the side called Social Currency, and she spoke to this very clearly. She said, you've got brands that come in and they want to dictate exactly what you do and say, and for those of us that have been doing this for a while, that's kind of a red flag, and we don't really want to work with those brands. And so it reiterated to me that, it has to be a mutual collaboration. We have to respect their expertise, and it's also going to come out better in the end for the brand.
Absolutely. And you mentioned authenticity there. I think it's quite impressive. We've got 60 minutes into the webinar and we've only just mentioned authenticity. So a big round of applause for everyone. But that it does raise a really, really great point, because when you talk about authenticity, both to the influencers audience, but of course the brand's audience as well, it's essential. And I'm going to come to you, Ricardo, on this, because ultimately you looked at trying to balance that and really try and make it, maintain that authenticity, particularly in relation to, Dwayne Reid's the Three Buds for Me tribute. I'm going to let the audience go away and just quickly Google that, just in case they haven't seen it. But just to kind of give them an intro, Ricardo, talk us through the kind of the modus operandi behind that tribute, and again, why you felt it was so effective.
Yeah, look, I think that's an amazing example in every from every angle, because it does represent what Budweiser's creative North Star is, which is to celebrate ordinary people doing extraordinary things. That's why we say this Bud's for you. It means that we share the same values, right? So Dwayne Wade, for those of you who are not familiar with the case, Dwayne Wade, NBA star from the Miami Heat, decides to retire from his career. And throughout the entire season, he has been trading jerseys at the end of every game with players like him that he respects. So we decided to surprise him with a jersey swap that he wasn't really prepared for. He was thinking that probably we're planning to surprise him with maybe Michael Jordan would come out, or Magic Johnson, or some of those legendary players from the past. But what we did instead, in understanding what he cares about, which I think is one of the keys in working with influencers and athletes, is starting from the understanding of what they care about, what defines them as people. And Dwayne Wade certainly is defined not only by his amazing NBA career, but by the fact that he has a foundation, that he helped a lot of people throughout his career, and some of the examples that are not widely known. So we decided to focus not on Dwayne Wade, the athlete, but on Dwayne Wade, the human being that people didn't know about. So we surprised them with by bringing a number of people from his past life that he helped, and we had a very powerful moment. I mean, we had 10 minutes on CNN talking about this particular case, simply because it's a great reminder in the times that we live in, when the news are, often very tense. We tend to focus on all that's wrong in the world. This was a great example to remind people that there's still good out there, right? So it was a very, very inspirational case, and very consistent to what the Budweiser brand has been doing for over the past few years. Just recently as well, the tribute to Jackie Robinson, the first African-American player in baseball, a great example of that as well. So I think to bring it all back, I think authenticity for sure, but consistency to what your brand stands for, your point of view on the world, and also understanding what the influencer, the athlete, what they care about, and respecting that. I think those are the keys to make this things like this happen.
Mm-hmm. And you raised a great point. I think there's a lot of conversations about kind of influencers and authenticity, and often I think, you know, larger scale influencers, whether it's a professional athlete, a professional actor, often, you know, their work with brands can be tarnished just because of the size of their audiences, and it seems to think, well, just because they're, you know, they're larger, the message they're pumping out there for is unauthentic. Whereas, you know, through actually focusing on what makes them relatable, which is exactly what the Dwayne Wade example does, you know, you're able to leverage their huge fan following, their huge reach, but you're actually focusing on the human story, and again, in doing so, relating that to Budweiser's story, and thus making it far more relatable. So yeah, no, it's a great example, and I'll actually be tweeting that out very, very shortly. In the issues of stories, that actually brings us to our kind of second area of discussion, which is looking at social media stories specifically. I'm going to come to you, Isaac. Do you take a different approach to social media stories, perhaps compared to just a regular social media post?
Yeah, I think it's mostly about, you know, trying to utilize the platform and, you know, the approach for, you know, what it's best for. You know, knowing that, you know, stories are great. I think it's important to establish, you know, KPIs and what we want, you know, these posts to do, whether it's, you know, just sharing brand awareness about, you know, what we're all about, or trying to drive, you know, interest in the websites. You know, swipe ups on stories are great for that. But I think it's just starting with your overall goals and then figuring out, you know, which platforms can ladder up back to those. You know, some fun things that we've done, just real quick, you know, trying with the message of, you know, engagement and trying to, you know, develop our community, get them talking about what we're doing, try to, you know, be a different brand in the space. You know, we've done things like trying to give people personalized, you know, Valentines on Twitter, singing them, you know, we're actually doing a fun thing for our birthday today, singing custom messages to some of our fans on Twitter, on Facebook, and having a barbershop quartet, you know, in-house to do that. So it's just trying to figure out, you know, what are these platforms, what are the strengths of these platforms, and how do we best, you know, utilize that for what our end goal is.
And I know there's definitely quite a few B2B marketers who are, well, both on the panel, but also on listening in as well. So coming over to you, Jessica, I mean, this one particularly annoys me. The idea that social stories are only a kind of B2C play, and are, you know, not necessarily within the kind of toolhouse of B2B marketers. First of all, do you agree with that? And I suppose, how have you leveraged stories, you know, in the past for effective engagement with your audiences?
Yeah, both good questions. So on your first question about whether it's appropriate for B2B or if it's largely focused on B2C, I definitely think there was a time years back when social media in general was more focused on the consumer-facing audiences. I absolutely don't think that's the case today. I mean, you look at the numbers from whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and virtually everybody's on social media platforms. So the idea that we can't reach folks that are business people or decision makers on social media is not the case anymore. So how they use those platforms obviously varies, right? Someone thinks about things a little bit differently on LinkedIn than they do maybe on Instagram. That said, stories and the notion of storytelling, and also the notion of this ephemeral content that is now here and gone tomorrow, that's appealing to everybody. I mean, that's just a human thing. So I absolutely employ, for example, Instagram stories with our executives. Cristiano is one of our kind of more active executives. He's our president here at Qualcomm, and we've gone live with him and also done kind of Q&A style segments to an Instagram story, specifically from key events where we're launching products. There's a lot of kind of energy and fervor around what we're talking about anyway, to give people that feeling of having access. Because to me, that's one of the beautiful things of social media, is it gives us that feeling of access to folks that we normally would not be able to ask questions of. So that's how I've used it from a B2B perspective.
And that definitely relates to the use of live video as well, which we're going to come to slightly later on in the webcast. But you raised the point in terms of it's a fantastic arm in which to kind of create an emotional connection. And on that, I want to come over to you, Chris, because you sent me something actually just a bit before the webcast where you mentioned you simply said storytelling on social is equally, if not more important for B2B than B2C. Because a lot of B2B solutions aren't inherently sexy or intuitive as consumer products. And I was, my neck was getting sore in terms of nodding in agreement. So have you got any kind of good examples of how you've leveraged both, that short-term storytelling, but also perhaps, feeding into a more long-term strategy at Hitachi to tell some of the stories around your not only your products, but of course your customers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, 100% agree with everything Jessica said. So double down on that one. A couple other examples that I would give from a short form perspective. We've been using or starting to use Instagram stories. Especially, it's great for sharing your company culture and sharing employee stories. Just the format itself just lends itself so well to something showcasing executives, but showcasing all levels of employees in different parts of the company. Events, as Jessica mentioned, are great. We actually also use them for what we call kind of product snapshots. So actually, if we have a product release, we might interview one of the engineers who kind of developed that, and where they how they developed those ideas, where they got the customer feedback. And then we'll also do things like what we call mobile moments, where we will actually share like a quick little demo of something using an Instagram story, generally some kind of mobile app or something that you can actually touch and feel. So lots of use cases in B2B. And then from a longer form perspective, just going out more broadly into just general storytelling, the reason I said that is I think stories are even more important for B2B is, again, a lot of times it is not necessarily the most sexy thing. A lot of the times it's the infrastructure, the plumbing that goes into the things that the consumer sees. So it's really important for us at Hitachi, for example, where we do a lot of the infrastructure and the behind the scenes work from a data perspective, to really share the customer stories and how we're actually making an impact on the business in the world. So we have this phrase called the double bottom line, which is that we aim to help customers not only with their kind of company bottom line, but their bottom line in terms of their impact on society. And so we'll tell stories around customers. For example, we do a lot of work with cities like the city of Las Vegas in terms of digitizing their city and helping them become a smart city with putting sensors around streets for traffic safety, and looking at analytics and how do you optimize traffic flow and park cleanliness and sustainability and things like that. Those are all very accessible, very tangible kinds of things that people can relate to and then create that emotional connection. So yeah, storytelling in video format, whether it's short form, long form, is I think absolutely critical to kind of telling your story. The other quick thing that's kind of unique to B2B is that these sales cycles can be extremely long. So whereas in B2C, where it might be an impulse buy or a short form or a short time frame purchase, in B2B, a lot of times the sales cycle can be months or even years. So you have a lot of swings to kind of tell your story, but it also provides a lot of opportunity to kind of craft a journey for your prospects and your customers.
So two things I'm stealing from this webinar already: Tinder for finding influencers, and the double bottom line. Big fan of that, Chris. Again, we'll be unashamedly passing that off as my own idea. Before we move on, Ricardo, obviously alongside leveraging stories for your own handles, brands are looking to inspire customers and audiences to kind of create their own stories, to create their own content. And there's a really nice example of Natural Light's it's Natural Light's college debt relief program, where ultimately you pointed out that college is about creating some pretty epic stories and not just some pretty severe debt. So how did you go about engaging that particular target audience, but then also inspiring them to make their own content and share their own stories?
Yeah, so that's a pretty interesting case. Natural Light is the favorite beer brand of LBA, so 21 plus college students in the U.S. And that's a very interesting case because, if you would go by the stereotype of the 21-year-old, you would think that all they care about is just to have a good time and to have a great party out with their friends, right? But when you start looking further, you actually understand that one of the big problems that they're dealing with is, of course, student debt. And that's where Natural Light came in. I mean, we took the Super Bowl stage, which is traditionally a space of very expensive production ads, a lot of celebrity power, and we took the stage of Super Bowl to raise awareness for the issue of student debt, but also disrupt the format in how brands show up at the Super Bowl stage by, to your point, giving out $1 million in donations, and by asking for content, so for user-generated content. We created an amazing piece, 100% created by our fans, by our audience, which was, of course, very different, very disruptive, and with a good cause at heart, which connects very much with the heart of this brand.
Fantastic. I'm actually just kind of gradually working my way through all of the questions that have come through. Jacqueline, Jordan, James, Wendy, Michael, thank you so much. Keep your questions coming in. We're definitely going to have a little bit of time, at the end. I say a little bit, as much as possible to run through them. So you have not been forgotten, I can assure you. The next piece that the audience was asking about in advance was in relation to live video. And we actually touched upon it. Jessica and Chris, you both touched upon it a fair amount in relation to the kind of storytelling. But Chris, I want to come back to you, as I know that you have had your eye on LinkedIn's new live video functionality that has been very groundbreakingly called LinkedIn Live. How exactly are you looking to leverage that? I believe it's still in beta. So, again, what's your hopes and goals for it, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is in the process of rolling out LinkedIn Live functionality, which basically is like Facebook Live, but on LinkedIn. And we're really excited about it. We're going to be one of the beta testers in that, as Jessica was mentioning about the platforms, LinkedIn especially has become a very powerful platform, especially in the B2B segment. For 5 or 6 years ago, LinkedIn was sort of, the place you went to look for a job, and it was your online resume, but it's really evolved into a destination for executives and people to consume content. And so it's become a very powerful platform from a marketing perspective. And so having something like LinkedIn Live, where you can actually do live broadcasts, we're really excited about. And there's a lot of use cases that you can think of. For example, it's great for, sort of doing these for thought leadership, in terms of kind of maybe supplementing some thought leadership content that you might have out there, maybe blogs or research reports, and bringing on that author or that subject matter expert for a quick interview, kind of similar to how podcasts might bring on, an author or a journalist or a director, for a movie they've just done or a book they've just written, right? To kind of, pull back the curtain a little bit and get a little bit more in depth on a particular topic. So we're excited about things like that. Events, of course, are going to be great. Behind the scenes videos, person on the street type interviews and things like that. And then again, just, I'll use the A word, the authenticity, being able to showcase your customers in a very kind of, transparent, user-generated kind of way, not highly produced necessarily, but again, just being able to have that real connection, we're excited about. And LinkedIn itself has sort of doubled down on video in general. I see them sort of favoring that from an algorithmic perspective, so I see this kind of feeding into their strategy. So it also helps from a performance and a metrics perspective, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you raised a really good point there in terms of one of the most effective times to leverage live video is indeed, kind of live reporting and sharing content from events. And interestingly, we actually did a kind of test recently with one of our clients from an event where we were at, and we went kind of head to head with a kind of formalized production video production company, and to see who could get more engagement, whether it is one of our team doing it from their mobile mobile phone and just doing very kind of man on the street, behind the scenes style video interviews compared to those formalized. And in actual fact, the iPhone won quite comprehensively, both in terms of views, but also in terms of sending people through to find out more about the event, about various products. So you made this point earlier, Jessica, in the sense of that very raw kind of shortcut and street style content not only is easier to create, but it seems like it engages more effectively as well. Isaac, I wanted to come over to you because I know you've got a little bit of experience in terms of leveraging live video over at Visible. Is this something which, again, you primarily just leverage when at events, or from anything, from product launches, etc.?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both. We've definitely done a few experiential type events throughout different markets in the country, where it really helps us get some of these reasons to believe across that why we think Visible is a great brand, whether it's a member of our executive team doing a Q&A. We've done a couple influencer takeovers that have helped bring that really to life and kind of bring more of a national view and a national help it bring to scale over than just in the market that we're at. So we've really seen the success of that as well, but also bringing it into who we are as a brand in-house too. We're going to be doing a series with our executive team to really, just in the spirit of transparency, do more of like a day in the life of what they do, the decisions they make, and bring our audience into that world, and let them pick a piece of creative or something like that. So really excited about that. Too, it's great about Visible that we've built a team from people who aren't all in the telecom space. So I come from, in previous roles, in the food service industry, worked for a few different brands in that world, and did cool videos with our chefs going live, making recipes in those styles of those Facebook videos that we see all the time and can never, at least I can't ever scroll past. I always have to watch them. So you get that real-time engagement through live video, and the ability to interact with our audience and take Q&As and do that has been a great success for us.
And often brands talk about how do we make ourselves more relatable, accessible, and then look to go and develop a kind of a 3-minute heavily produced video with actors and voiceovers and things like that. Whereas it seems as if you just go and actually empower your employee base, whether it is Jessica and working with her exec team, or actually just empowering your kind of any member of staff or any of your influencers within your community to just go and share the behind the scenes. Suddenly you'll find yourself being far more accessible and far more relatable. The next piece, and I've actually already had a couple of questions on this, which is a great kind of lead in from the audience, so thank you, is looking at leveraging podcasts. And I'm going to come to you first, Jessica, primarily because not only does Qualcomm have a pretty budding podcast, but you're also the co-host of the Social Currency podcast as well. So it's fair to say that you know your way around a podcast. So starting with brands, how do you think brands should be approaching podcasting? We know it's been around for quite a while, but really, where do you see the value for brands in leveraging podcasts?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I will fully admit that I've inherited the Qualcomm podcast just over the last 9 months. So I did not start that from the beginning, and want to give the credit to the folks that did. But I've been evaluating, obviously listening to all the episodes, getting to know, our host and sort of the cadence and the content mix, just trying to kind of assess what do we do with this this tool, right? This awesome budding world of audio, which is just, it's blowing up, and it has been blowing up for the last 24 months. So from my perspective so far, the notion of what does a company or a corporate podcast look like, I don't think it's that different from some of the discussions we've already had on stories and going live, where, bringing on interesting guests that are perhaps the people behind the technologies. That's always of interest to folks that are following tech brands. So the inventors, the engineers, how did you come up with this? Those kinds of stories. I think also external folks. Again, we've got lots of partners and customers that I want to begin to think about how do we involve them on the podcast, because that's, again, an interesting discussion, us and them, and that working relationship to collaborate to bring something to market. Thirdly, I think the other reason that I'm bullish on corporate podcasts is because it's, again, such an overused word, just like authenticity, but it's true. The human nature of corporations has all but gone away. And podcasts are literally content in your head, right? They're in your ears, and sometimes for up to 45 minutes at a time. So the idea of taking the voices of people that work at a company that otherwise might feel very, again, corporate and sort of square and hard to make sense of, and humanizing and giving them softness and vulnerability, and they're laughing, and that's in your head. That's a pretty special place from a content marketing perspective.
And I love the fact that you brought vulnerability up there. That is typically a word that might not be on the mood board when looking at what a goal for a piece of content might be. Let's hope it makes us look more vulnerable, but that is a fundamental part of becoming more human and more accessible. So I think it's a great point. My final question there, Jessica, in terms of, somehow we've managed to go, we've gone 40 minutes without saying this one. In terms of KPIs for your podcast, what does success look like for you guys in terms of your podcast at Qualcomm?
Yeah, it's a great point. And again, fully admit that I'm still kind of in the evaluation and assessment phase of the Qualcomm podcast. If you look at podcasts all up, which I think I just read a statistic this week that said there are over 700,000 podcasts in the world. There's a ton of podcasts right now. And the average podcast gets about 150 downloads or listens per episode. So not that many. So if you look at the statistics and go, okay, even if we can get over 1,000 per episode, we're probably in the top 5 to 10% of all podcasts. So you can start to do things like that. Just go, okay, look at the bell curve. How many listens and downloads are we getting per episode? How many subscribers do we have? Those are kind of the vanity metrics, similar to the things we look at in the social media space around engagements and followers. Over time, I'd love to think about it as part of our repertoire of digital content. So it's one arrow in our quiver, and really couple it with things like search, blogging, social, of course, and then go, okay, as a composite, as a portfolio of digital tools that we go out with, say, when a product launches. Podcast is one of them, very important, again, long form, more personal piece of content. Let's measure the portfolio and the success of that digital portfolio. Did we lift brand favorability through a Nielsen survey? Did we drive more association between Qualcomm and, say, a new area for us like VR? Those are the things that would be more meaningful to me, but that's kind of the next step for us.
Fantastic. And naturally, the conversation has developed somewhat into analyzing, of course, our success metrics and data, and that is actually going to kind of form the basis of one of our final pieces. When looking at new innovative content marketing formats, how do you assess whether it's most effective for you? And Chris, from chatting beforehand, it seems that you take a very unbiased approach to your current formats and potentially new formats, and you simply let the data direct you, firstly in relation to platform, but also format. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, kind of a phrase I like to use is let the data tell us what the best practices are. But I also fully understand that marketing is art and science, but and I'm fully on board with experimenting. But I do also believe in just the objectivity. So we do a lot of A/B testing on format types, even copywriting, just to try to figure out how do we come up with that optimal mix. So an example, and I think I referenced it earlier, is just the use of native video on the social platforms. Pretty much all the platforms now, you know, they obviously have the native video capability, LinkedIn more recently. And when we look at the numbers in terms of engagement and reach and compare it to, you know, other posts and just look at it over time, you know, native video just performs just astoundingly well. Probably not a huge surprise, you know, video is huge, but it's good to sort of have numbers around it. And it's really changed, at least tactically, how we think about our editorial calendar and how we think about our social channels. So, you know, whereas maybe a couple of years ago, we'd throw everything on YouTube and put a link to it and point to YouTube. Now we're really focusing a lot more on actually uploading kind of native video to our posts. Not only does it save that one click, and as we all know, saving users an extra click is huge, but I also think that the platforms are favoring native video content in their algorithms. And I've talked to my counterparts at other kind of large brand companies to see if they're seeing the same thing, and they have. So again, that's just an example of kind of, you know, looking at data, kind of comparing with your peers, and you know, moving forward. So, you know, test and iterate, especially with all these great new content formats.
Absolutely. But before, I'm actually going to do some quick fire questions just to kind of round off at the end of the webinar. But my final question, I'm going to come to you, Ricardo. When we look at new and innovative kind of content marketing formats and channels and types, often it's very easy to jump on the kind of newest, shiniest thing. However, you know, one of the examples you actually sent over beforehand, specifically the hashtag See Her campaign, I thought was a lovely exemplification of not necessarily using a new format, but actually taking a kind of a new look on some ads and some messaging that Budweiser shared back in the 1950s. So can you shed a little bit of light on, well, for that campaign as a whole, but what really spurred you to go, you know, back to this old creative and just give it a kind of, you know, a 21st century uplift?
Perfect. Yes. I mean, it is important to say that piece run during International Women's Day. So there was cultural context around it. And essentially what we did was going back in time to some of our ads that didn't necessarily or at all represent women in the way they should. We went back and we redesigned them to reflect today's woman in partnership with See Her, with you know, a number of female illustrators. So as someone mentioned earlier about something about showing vulnerability, and this I think is a great example of that, to recognize that as a brand we didn't always do the right thing, and we didn't always represent women in the best way in our advertising. And that's why, by partnering with See Her, with an organization that has a lot of credibility in this space, they essentially focus on representing women correctly in advertising. According to their own data, only 60% of all ads run today do that job properly. So there's still a lot of work to do. And we were happy to be able to contribute to that. And I think this is one of the great examples on how we run our brands. We look at, we have a newsroom. So we look first and foremost at what's happening in culture, recognizing that TV viewership is at the all-time low, right? So the traditional ways of reaching people no longer necessarily work as hard as they used to. So we're looking at running our brands through the newsroom standpoint, building a cultural calendar around each brand that represents its point of view, and participating in that conversation. We talk a lot about storytelling, of course, but we believe that there's a lot more power in engaging in the conversation, in something that's already part of culture, that's already top of mind for our audience, and then bringing our point of view to that conversation. And this is certainly one of those examples.
I couldn't agree more. And again, I'll be sure to kind of tweet that out, as well as some of the other examples that the panel have shared on Twitter following the webcast. We are rapidly running out of time, and in that vein, I would really like to rapidly run through some of the questions that the audience have been sending through. So I'm gonna put it on our panel just before we leave to give me some very short and quick answers, and we're going to rattle through some of these questions. So, Jessica, coming to you first, do you use any influencer marketing tools for prospecting/CRM?
I do not. I believe in the beginning it should be very organic and high touch.
Fantastic. Chris Kim, who do you follow for inspiration in terms of your creative, in terms of your marketing strategy as a whole?
Oh gosh, it's funny. I actually follow a lot of the consumer brands. I like to steal a lot of their ideas and kind of bring that over in the vein of a lot of things we've talked about. So, I mean, it's everything from authors and Malcolm Gladwell to the Golden State Warriors to name your favorite podcaster. So I read a funny statistic that on average people scroll through I think 300 feet of feed every day on their phone, and so I'm one of those people who's always swiping away and taking a look at what's new. But yeah, I get a lot of inspiration just from the things that you're personally interested in.
Absolutely, and there is nothing wrong with stealing. I regularly do it from Jessica and her podcast. Moving to you, Isaac, what do you think will be the next big movement within social media? Just a little question there.
Wow, yeah. Let's do another 45 minutes just on that. No, but I think what you're seeing, just in terms of just sticking to influencer marketing, I think we, almost in the walls of visible influencer is almost this like weird word. So I think that just industry will continue to expand and really, not to belabor the authenticity point, but, what you're seeing with, people who aren't, having the glorious, glamorous feeds and are rising to the top of some of these huge influencer lists is very interesting. So I think that industry will constantly be changing, and we'll just have to keep up with the times. But really excited to see where that goes specifically.
Fantastic. And penultimate question, Jessica, because I know you spoke about this briefly. How do you deal with FTC disclosure requirements and influencer content?
Yeah, good question. So those rules are still evolving, and I know that they've made some recommendations and certainly encourage disclosure. I was just having a conversation last week with someone about this, and I've actually called into an FTC sort of 101 call about this very topic to learn more. So it's not black or white. It varies by country for sure. The rules in China, for example, very different than the US. So my perspective is, as a brand partnering with influencers, I'm going to encourage and perhaps even put it in the brief for commissioned work that influencers state that they're in partnership, that this is being sponsored, or however they'd like to communicate that to their followers, so that I've done my job to make that ask. Ultimately, though, it really resides with the influencers to do it or not do it, because frankly, the responsibility is a bit more on them. But I always make that request because I also just think it's the right thing to do with their audiences. So their audiences are really clear and there's transparency there.
Fantastic. And finally, Ricardo, how do you instill bravery within your creative team and your brand as a whole? And a couple of people actually referenced, obviously, the recent controversy that Gillette found themselves in, and when talking about masculinity and what it means to be masculine. So, how do you ensure that you are both, creative but also brave in terms of your messaging, ABInBev?
Know what you're what you stand for as a brand. I think we often jump into try to find a solution without having a very, very clear point of view as a brand. And then after that, you need to trust the people around you and empower the teams around you, both agency and also, of course, my internal team here, and go and learn from those examples. I remember years ago when we put out a spot telling the story of our immigrant founder, Adolphus Bush, in the middle of the immigration debate that was happening in the U.S. Back at that point. That, it stirred up a conversation, but the reason why it was very credible for us and the reason why we stuck to our story because it's the story of our founder, and because it is so deeply connected to what we stand for as a brand. So, and indeed, I mean, the times we live in, more and more consumers are asking for brands to have a clear point of view.
So it's about knowing that point of view and empowering your entire workforce to help to communicate that themselves. A fantastic way to end. So many great insights, so many great questions as well that unfortunately we weren't able to get to. Please do not let them disappear with the webinar software. Please do go ahead and ask them on Twitter as well. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Aaron.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jack. That was a really great webinar, and I really enjoyed it. I've written lots of notes as well. They said it's a bit of a shame we couldn't get through more questions, but I'll definitely take a look over and see if there's any Insight Group content that we can share that will help answer it. Maybe there's some previous webinars out there we can send to, or some of our event content. So I'll definitely take a look through. So thank you very much for sharing that. Let's say a big thank you to Jack for moderating today's discussion. He's done a really great job today, and also a big thank you to our panel as well. So this should be coming onto the screen now. So having a bit of technical difficulties there. There's the panel again for today. Really great having you all involved. Thanks again for joining us. And a quick bit of housekeeping before we go as well. I know lots of people listening to this webinar have already filled in this year's State of Marketing survey. It's a survey we run every year with over 1,000 marketers, and at the end we produce a report which you can use to benchmark and set your future strategies. So do take part in that if you can. The link is there. It's surveymonkey.com/r/state of M, and you'll get a free copy of the report for taking part in the survey, and it only takes around about 7 minutes. And then I'd just like to give a quick shout out to some of the events we've got coming up. Next week we're in San Francisco for the Brand Marketing Summit West. So there's the link for that there. If you live in San Francisco, there's still a few tickets available. Later in June we have our homecoming here in London. It's been a few years since we've done our London event, but that's going to be a great one to come along to. And then later in the year, in this fall, we have our big flagship summit in New York. So if you can make it to any of those, please do let us know. And really looking forward to hopefully catching up with a few of you then soon. One big last thank you to everyone for joining, and thanks again to our panelists and Jack for today's discussion. Thank you very much. Cheers.